As you might be able to tell from the sweat pouring down my forehead, the UK is experiencing an unprecedented heat wave. Wales has registered its hottest day on record, hitting 37.1 degrees Celsius in Scotland. Temperatures hit 31.3 in Aboyne. That's only 1.6 below its record. And Northern Ireland experienced 31.1 in Derrylin, only 0.2 below its record, which was recorded last year. But England scored the highest temperatures. The mercury hit 38.1 at Santon Downham in Suffolk, just 0.6 degrees below its record, which was measured in 2019. The effect of the heatwave, of course, has been very real. Hospitals have cancelled operations, flights have been grounded, and the heatwave could lead to significant casualties. Indeed, the government's former chief medical advisor, Sir David King, has warned that the two hottest days of the heatwave could result in 10,000 excess deaths. So it's clear why the UK Health Security Agency has issued a red warning for this heatwave, the first time ever such a warning has been made for extreme heat. Yet despite all this, Boris Johnson doesn't seem too fussed. He's missed multiple Cobra meetings to address the record temperatures and instead has spent his time having parties at Chequers and doing this. That was Boris Johnson flying in an RAF Typhoon. He's clearly keen to rinse all the taxpayer-funded freebies he can get during his last 2 months in office. Who wouldn't? Although, if you're Prime Minister, you probably should attend those Cobra meetings. Boris Johnson, for his part, is not getting pressure from his backbenchers to take this more seriously. In fact, quite the opposite. Conservative MP John Hayes told The Telegraph, "This is not a brave new world, but a cowardly new world where we live in a country where we are frightened of the heat. It's not surprising that in snowflake Britain, the snowflakes are melting. Thankfully, most of us are not snowflakes." John Hayes has been given a £50,000 salary by an oil company since 2018. That's according to the Parliamentary Register, which, could have something to do with why he seems a little bit dismissive of climate change. Right-wing journalists are also responding through oppositional lens. Ahead of the heatwave, this is how Bev Turner of GB News questioned the meteorologist John Hammond.
By early next week, you can scrap 20 degrees. It could well be 40 degrees. I think there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of excess deaths early next week. The charts that I can see in front of me are frightening. So we all like nice weather, but this will not be nice weather. This will be potentially lethal weather for a couple of days. It'll be brief, but it'll be brutal.
So, John,
we can...
So, John, I want us to be happy about the weather and every single... I don't know whether something's happened to meteorologists to make you all a little bit fatalistic and harbingers of doom. Because all of the broadcasts, particularly on the BBC, every time I've turned on anyone's talking about the weather, they're saying that there's going to be tons of fatalities. But haven't we always had hot weather, John? Wasn't the summer of 76, that was as hot as this, wasn't it?
No. And we are seeing more and more records, more and more frequently and more severely. Some people always hark back to the summer of 76, which was a freak event 40-odd years ago, over 40 years ago. But heat waves are becoming more extreme. This is yet another one which is coming down the tracks towards us. And, I don't think we should be too light-hearted about the fact that many are going to die early next week because of the heat. 40 degrees, the sort of temperature that this country, I'm afraid, is just not geared up to cope with.
That was incredibly embarrassing television. For a hopefully more productive discussion than you'll find on GB News, I'm joined now by climate scientist Dr. Ella Gilbert. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
To kick us off, we keep hearing this reference to 1976. I know it's before either of us were born, but as a climate scientist, can you tell me the significance of that? Why are all these people who are trying to diminish the significance of this heatwave talking about that year?
So 1976 is often kind of trotted out by climate deniers who like to look through rose-tinted glasses and remember a time where we just had a nice summer and it was hot and nobody minded. So 1976 was undeniably quite a warm summer. I think the maximum temperature was just shy of 36 degrees, and it was very long. However, the main difference between what we're seeing now and 1976 is, first of all, that 1976, it was mostly just the UK that was really hot. The rest of the world was kind of average temperatures. In contrast to 2022, where you look at a map of the difference above what we consider normal for the time of year, and almost no part of the globe is not above average temperatures. So we're seeing heat waves, obviously all across Europe, with really devastating temperatures, well above 40 degrees in many countries, but also all over the world. We're seeing it in the Arctic, the Antarctic, North America, South America, Europe, you name it. It's very widespread, this heat. And of course, 40 degrees is warmer than just shy of 36 degrees. So it's a false comparison, I would say, but it's often used to try and distract from the idea or the message that climate change is intensifying extreme events. It's making them hotter, it's making them longer, and it's making them happen more frequently.
Is this in line with what was expected, or is this hotter than what sort of the mainstream climate models were suggesting we'd be seeing by 2022?
Interestingly, a couple of years ago, the Met Office did an exercise where they tried to put together a kind of hypothetical forecast for the 2050s. And I think the top temperature on that chart was 40 degrees. So if you compare the actual real weather forecast with that hypothetical forecast for the 2050s, it looks remarkably similar. So although this is a really unprecedented event, and this is a very freak occurrence in terms of what we've already seen, it does appear like the kind of changes we were predicting for the 2050s are starting to manifest themselves now.
I don't know the details of that projection. Were they potentially saying that in 2050, this is going to be the norm? So your standard weather forecast will show that it's 40 degrees every day. And now we're just getting sort of like a taster of it with this sort of one-off, or am I getting the wrong end of the stick?
I wouldn't say that it would be the norm in 2050, but it would certainly be true that we would have heat waves, whereas a heat wave in our current climate might be a 30-degree heat wave. By the 2050s, it might be more likely that we would get 40-degree heat waves. We know that by the end of the century, if we keep kind of going on the track that we're going on, whereas at the moment 40-degree days are so unlikely that they would happen maybe once every 300 years or something like that, by the end of the century, if we keep going as we're going, it could be more like every 15 years. And it's better than the worst case scenario, which would be 3 to 4 years. But it all depends essentially on what we do now to curb emissions.
Now, as you've already mentioned, it's not just Britain being hit with this extreme heat. And one of the consequences across Europe has been wildfires. This footage was taken from a train in Spain.
What's he doing? What's he
An incredibly terrifying, apocalyptic image. I mean, I should reassure you, no one was hurt on that train, but just it's an image that doesn't portend a particularly promising future. Ella, who's being hit hardest by these increasing temperatures?
So as with many extreme events, unfortunately, it is the most vulnerable people, the most marginalised and the poorest in our society that are feeling the worst effects of this. So in the UK particularly, it's the very old, people with disabilities or existing health conditions, or the very young. So anyone who's susceptible to cardiovascular or respiratory complaints, then they're particularly at risk.
Internationally as well, in terms of across Europe or this particular heat wave, where would you least like to live right now?
It's always going to be the poorest and most marginalised people who feel the worst effects. It's the people who are least able to cope with and adapt to these sorts of extreme circumstances. If you live in a country where temperatures are currently topping 45 degrees and you don't have access to cool spaces, air conditioning or shade, or you're being forced because you have to make money to work in the hot sun outdoors all day, then you're going to be much more at risk of having some negative consequences as a result of the heat. So it's both within countries and across the world, it's always going to be the people who are poorest or most marginalised who are feeling the worst effects.